The night air was thick with the scent of rain, the pavement slick beneath Rayan's worn-out shoes as he wandered aimlessly through the desolate streets. Neon lights flickered above closed shops, casting eerie shadows that danced like ghosts around him. He barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in a relentless loop of regret, failure, and loss. Rayan had once been a man of faith, a man of vision, a successful entrepreneur, a loving husband, a devoted son. He had built an empire from nothing, climbed from the dirt to the sky. And yet, all of it was gone now, reduced to dust by his own misjudgments, by the cruelty of fate, by the people he had trusted most. The weight of his past pressed against his chest like an iron hand. His business had collapsed in a storm of corruption. One wrong deal, one misplaced trust, and everything had crumbled beneath him. Investors abandoned him, the media tore him apart, and overnight, he had gone from an industry giant to a cautionary tale. His wife Sarah had tried to hold on, but the cracks between them had grown into vast, impassable chasms. Years of emotional distance had worn her down. The night she packed her bags, she didn't even cry. "I can't do this anymore, Rayan," she had whispered before walking out of the door, and out of his life. Then came the ultimate betrayal. His best friend Zaid, the man he had considered a brother, had not only abandoned him but stolen the last of his wealth, his savings, his trust. "It's just business," Zaid had said, the words like poison. And then his mother, his anchor, his guiding light. She had always believed in him, even when he stopped believing in himself. On her deathbed, she had held his hand and whispered, "Have faith, my son. Even when the night is darkest, the dawn will come." He had nodded then, but deep inside he had already stopped believing. And now there was no dawn. Now there was only this night. This endless storm. This unbearable pain. The rain had started falling, gentle at first, then harder, like the sky itself was mourning him. Rayan barely felt it as he walked to the bridge. The river below was dark and violent, its waters surging like his tormented soul. He gripped the cold railing, knuckles turning white, staring down at the abyss. The world had taken everything from him. His wealth, his love, his trust, his faith. What was left? A gust of wind howled through the air, rattling the rusted metal beneath his fingers. Would it be so bad to just let go? Would it be so bad to finally silence the voice in his head that whispered of guilt, of shame, of irredeemable failure? He closed his eyes, his breath ragged. One step. That's all it would take. If you think your story is over, you haven't read the last chapter. The voice cut through the storm, steady and deep. Rayan's eyes snapped open. He turned. Standing just a few feet away, illuminated by the flickering street lamp, was an old man. His face was lined with age, his silver hair damp from the rain. He held a simple wooden cane, his posture unwavering. His eyes, those piercing, knowing eyes, locked onto Rayan's, as if seeing the storm raging inside him. "Go away," Rayan muttered. The old man smiled softly. "Not yet." Rayan's fists clenched. "I don't need saving." "Who said I came to save you?" the man asked. His voice was calm, gentle, yet impossibly strong. "I only came to remind you. The story isn't over yet." Rayan let out a bitter laugh. "My story ended a long time ago." "No," the old man shook his head. "Your story is still being written. And you haven't even turned the page." Rayan swallowed, something about the man's words stirring a deep, buried part of him. A part that had long been silent. "Who are you?" he whispered. The old man stepped closer, the rain dripping from the folds of his dark coat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn-out book. The edges were tattered, the cover weathered. It looked ancient, yet powerful, as if it held secrets beyond time. "Take this," the man said, extending the book toward him. Rayan hesitated. "What is it?" "A key," the old man replied. "To the 3 doors of truth." Rayan's brows furrowed. "I don't understand." "You will," the man assured him. "But only if you seek the answers for yourself." Something inside Rayan twisted. A part of him wanted to reject the book, to reject the old man, to reject this entire ridiculous moment. But another part, a whisper of curiosity, of something he couldn't name, urged him to take it. His fingers brushed against the book as he reached for it. And in that moment, a bolt of lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the entire bridge. For a brief second the world flashed white. And then Elias was gone. Rayan blinked, his breath coming fast. He turned wildly, scanning the bridge, the streets, the rain-soaked road. The old man had disappeared. But the book was still in his hands. The wind howled around him, but for the first time in a long time, Rayan felt something else stir within him. Not just grief, not just guilt, not just pain, something deeper, something he thought he had lost. Oh. And as the storm raged on, Rayan clutched the book to his chest and took a step away from the edge. A new journey had begun. Rayan gripped the worn-out book tightly as he walked through the empty streets. The night's storm had passed, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and the distant hum of the city stirring awake. 3 doors of truth. The words of the old man, Elias, echoed in his mind. He hadn't wanted to believe in riddles, hadn't wanted to believe in anything at all. But something deep inside, something buried under years of pain, was pushing him forward. The first location written inside the book led him to the outskirts of the city, where the ruins of a chapel stood against the rising sun. It was a haunting sight. Burned walls, shattered windows, and a collapsed roof, a place where faith had once thrived, now reduced to ashes. And yet, amidst the wreckage, one figure remained, an old woman kneeling in prayer. She was frail, her clothes simple, her silver hair pulled back beneath a tattered shawl. She didn't flinch when Rayan stepped closer. "You're wasting your time," he muttered. "This place is already gone." The woman opened her eyes and smiled. "Faith isn't about what you see. It's about what you believe." Rayan scoffed. "Belief doesn't change the fact that this place is in ruins." She extended her hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "Help me clear the debris." Rayan hesitated. He had no reason to help, no reason to care. And yet, without thinking, he crouched beside her and began lifting broken wood, brushing away ash-covered stone. The work was slow, his hands becoming dirty, his muscles aching. But as he cleared away the wreckage, something strange began happening. With each piece of rubble moved, a memory resurfaced. His mother's voice reading him bedtime prayers. His father holding his small hands in prayer. Time when he truly believed. Hours passed. Finally, as the morning sun spilled through the broken walls, Rayan noticed something untouched by the fire. In the very center of the ruins, standing tall and unburned, was a wooden cross. He froze. It was impossible. Everything around it had turned to ash, yet the cross remained pure. The old woman saw the look on his face and smiled. "Still think faith is about what we see." For the first time in years, Rayan felt the smallest crack in his disbelief. Maybe, just maybe, God hadn't abandoned him after all. The second location led Rayan to a crumbling orphanage on the far side of town. The gate creaked as he pushed it open, stepping into the courtyard. The sound of soft voices singing filled the air. He followed the sound and stopped when he saw them. A group of blind children, their faces lifted toward the sky, singing in perfect harmony. The sight made his chest tighten. How could they sing with such joy in a place of such despair? "Beautiful, isn't it?" Rayan turned. A tall man with clouded eyes and a gentle smile stood before him, holding a cane. "Jonah," the man introduced himself. "Caretaker of these children." "How do they?" Rayan gestured toward the singing. "They don't see with their eyes," Jonah said. "They see with their hearts." Rayan frowned. "That sounds like something people say when they don't want to face reality." Jonah chuckled. "And yet, reality is what we choose to believe. Tell me, Rayan, would you trust your steps if you couldn't see the ground beneath you?" Before Rayan could answer, Jonah clapped his hands. A young girl no older than 8 ran up. "Meet Aisha," Jonah said. "She was born blind. Yet she will teach you something today." Jonah pulled out a blindfold. "Put this on. And Aisha will guide you through the obstacle course." Rayan hesitated. "What if I fall?" Jonah smiled. "Then you'll learn how faith works." With a deep breath, Rayan tied the blindfold around his eyes. "Take my hand," Aisha said softly. She led him forward, step by step. He couldn't see anything, only darkness, but he felt her tiny fingers guiding him. "Left," she whispered. He turned. "Step up." He lifted his foot. A few more careful steps, and suddenly, he was on the other side. He pulled the blindfold off, staring at the path behind him. He had done it. Not by sight, by trust. Jonah's voice was warm. Faith is seeing with the heart, not the eyes. Before Rayan could respond, something incredible happened. A stranger in a suit entered the orphanage, speaking with Jonah. The blind caretaker's face lit up with shock and joy. He turned to the children, voice shaking. "A donor has just offered enough money to keep the orphanage running." Gasps of excitement. Aisha clapped her hands. Rayan stood frozen. Second sign. A second impossible moment. Coincidence. Or something more. For the first time, Rayan wasn't so sure. The third location led Rayan to the cliffs. The sea roared below, waves crashing against jagged rocks. At the very edge stood a lighthouse, its windows dark, forgotten. Inside, he found a man sitting alone, staring at nothing. Rayan knew that look. It was his own reflection from months ago. A man who had given up. "You came for answers," the man said without turning. Rayan hesitated. "I came to understand." The man exhaled. "This lighthouse, used to guide ships home. But the storms became too strong. One by one the keepers left. The light has been out for years." Rayan glanced at the dust-covered control panel. "Why not turn it back on?" The man's gaze met his for the first time. "Why would it matter? It's useless now." A flicker of anger rose in Rayan. "Is it? Or are you afraid that if you light it again, you'll have to believe in something?" Silence. Without another word, Rayan walked up to the panel, wiped away the dust and flipped the switch. For a moment, nothing. Then a spark. Flicker. A glow. And finally, a golden beam of light pierced the darkness. Rayan turned back to the man. "This light isn't just for ships. It's for lost souls like you." The man's expression crumbled. And for the first time he wept. And Rayan, he realized something. Faith wasn't about asking for miracles. It was about becoming the miracle for someone else. And maybe, just maybe, he had found his purpose again. For the first time in years, Rayan felt the faint glow of hope inside him. The ruins of the chapel, the singing children in the orphanage, the light of the abandoned lighthouse, they had all shown him glimpses of something he thought was lost. But faith is always tested. Started with whispers. Then came the storm. Rayan had been helping at the orphanage when he noticed people staring at him. Some whispered behind his back, others pointed their phones at him. A group of men stood by the gate. One of them, dressed in an expensive suit, stepped forward. Well, the man sneered. "The great Rayan has fallen quite far." Rayan's stomach twisted. He knew that voice. Bill. His former business partner. The man who had once stood beside him in boardrooms, making million-dollar deals. The man who had abandoned him when the company crumbled. Adil held up his phone, shaking his head mockingly. "It's funny. A year ago you were living in a penthouse. Now you're playing savior in a dump like this." Rayan's jaw clenched. "What do you want, Adil?" Adil's smirk faded. His eyes burned with accusation. "I want you to answer for what you did." "What I did?" Rayan stepped forward. "You and Zaid were the ones who..." Adil held up a printed article and shoved it into Rayan's hands. Rayan's blood ran cold. The headline screamed at him. "Disgraced entrepreneur Rayan. Fraud or failure." Below it were hundreds of comments. "He scammed investors." "He's a liar." People like him deserve to suffer. Rayan felt nauseous. It didn't matter that the article twisted the truth, or that he had tried to do the right thing. In the eyes of the world, he was still a criminal. "Investors lost everything because of you," Adil spat. "And now you're hiding here, playing charity." Rayan wanted to fight back. He wanted to tell the world the real story, how he had been the one betrayed. But no one would listen. Because failure is louder than truth. "Stay away from me, Adil," Rayan muttered, pushing past him. Adil's voice followed him. "You can play the saint all you want. But no one forgives a man like you." The words stuck to his skin like poison. The article spread like wildfire. People at the orphanage stopped meeting his eyes. The staff who once welcomed him now whispered behind closed doors. Even Jonah, the blind caretaker, seemed to sense the shift in the air. Rayan tried to ignore it. Tried to hold on. One night, he returned to the shelter where he had been sleeping for weeks. His only real friend there was Tariq, a fellow homeless man. Tariq was the first person who had treated him like a human being after his downfall. They had shared meals, stories, and quiet moments of understanding. That night, however, Tariq was nowhere to be found. And neither was Rayan's last bit of money. His heart sank. Not Tarek. Not him. Rayan searched the alleyways, rain pouring down on him as he ran. Finally, he spotted Tarek near an old market, handing money to a street vendor. The money was Rayan's. Tarek turned, and for a moment, guilt flickered in his eyes. "You stole from me." Rayan's voice was hoarse. Tarek sighed. "I had no choice, Rayan." "You always have a choice," Rayan said. Tarek's jaw clenched. "No, people like us don't. You still think you're better than the rest of us, don't you? Some fallen prince waiting for redemption." He scoffed. "Wake up, Rayan. The world already decided what you are. And people like us, we survive however we can." Rayan felt the anger rising. Not just at Tarek, but at himself. At the world. "You think this is survival?" Rayan whispered. "You think being like them is the only way?" Tarek laughed bitterly. "You still don't get it. There's no them. There's no. There's only who has power and who doesn't. And you're nothing now." The words cut deeper than a knife. Rayan turned away, the rain masking the burning in his eyes. The chapel, the orphanage, the lighthouse. Had any of it meant anything? Or had he been a fool for ever believing he could be something more? That night, Rayan sat alone in an abandoned building, drenched and shaking. The book from Elias lay beside him, untouched. He had believed he was healing. But faith was fragile, and he felt it slipping away again. His fingers trembled as he opened the book. He had flipped through its pages before, but tonight something new caught his eye. Letter. The paper was yellowed with age, the edges delicate. His heart stopped. It was his mother's handwriting. His breath hitched as he unfolded it, his fingers tracing the familiar curves of her words. "My son, I know you are hurting, but you were never alone. Even in your darkest nights, he was there. Even when you could not feel him, he was guiding you. Even when you thought all was lost, he had already written a path for you. Have faith, my child. Because the story isn't over yet." Tears spilled down Rayan's face. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry. Not out of anger, not out of regret, not out of hopelessness, but out of something else. Something warm, something real. He knelt, the letter clenched in his hands. And for the first time since he was a child, he prayed. The wind carried a strange silence that night. Rayan sat on the orphanage steps, staring at the old book Elias had given him. The letter from his mother was folded carefully inside. The words burned into his mind. Even in your darkest nights, he was there. He had prayed for the first time in years, but doubt still clung to his heart like shadows refusing to let go. Was faith real? Or was he chasing an illusion, something to comfort himself in the face of failure? He sighed, standing up. The night was unusually warm, too still for comfort. Even the stars seemed to hide behind the clouds. That's when he heard it. Scream. Then another. And then the smell of smoke. Rayan's heart stopped. He turned toward the orphanage, and his blood ran cold. Flames, orange and red, hungry and alive, consuming the walls of the place he had grown to love. The orphanage was on fire. Rayan's legs moved before his mind could process. He sprinted toward the building, shouts filling the air. Some of the children had escaped, standing outside, their faces streaked with fear and ash. Jonah, the blind caretaker, stumbled through the smoke, calling out names. "Jonah!" Rayan grabbed his arms. "Are all the children out?" Jonah's face was tight with panic. "Whoa. 3 are still inside." Rayan felt a cold terror settle in his chest. A deafening crash. The roof over the east wing caved in. The flames climbed higher, a monster refusing to be tamed. "You can't go in there," someone shouted. "The fire is too strong." But Rayan had already made his choice. He ran into the burning orphanage. The heat was immediate, suffocating. Smoke clawed at his throat, turning every breath into knives. The walls, once filled with children's laughter, now groaned in pain. He stumbled forward, covering his mouth with his sleeve. "Hello," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Where are you?" Cough. Weak voice. "H here." He turned the corner and saw them. 2 boys and a girl huddled in the far corner, trapped beneath a fallen wooden beam. Rayan's pulse roared in his ears. He had no time to think. He gritted his teeth and lifted the beam. It burned against his skin, but he didn't let go. With a final desperate heave, he threw it aside. Come on. He grabbed the girl first, carrying her in his arms as the two boys held onto his shirt. The hallway behind them collapsed. No way back. The fire screeched, devouring everything in its path. Ryan's lungs ached. His vision blurred. He ran. The exit was near. Almost there. But the flames had other plans. The roof shuddered, then boom. Rayan felt a blast of heat as something collapsed behind him. Fire swallowed the hallway. No escape. His knees buckled, exhaustion threatening to consume him. The girl in his arms whimpered. His mind screamed, this is where it ends. The fire would take them. And then, through the smoke, he saw a figure standing in the light. It wasn't human. It wasn't of this world. Elias. Or something greater. Ryan's vision dimmed. The last thing he felt was a hand on his shoulder. Then, darkness. The first thing Rayan felt was light. Not heat. Not pain. Just light. His eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was still dreaming. White walls, soft sheets, the distant sound of a heart monitor. Hospital. He was alive. He exhaled, his body aching with every breath. His arms were wrapped in bandages. His skin scorched but healing. And then a voice. You're awake. He turned his head. Una. The blind caretaker sat by his bedside. His face filled with relief and gratitude. The children. Ryan's voice was hoarse. Jonah smiled. Dave. Thanks to you. Rayan felt the tension in his chest loosen. They told me what happened, Jonah continued. How you carried them through the flames. How you collapsed just before reaching the door. Rayan frowned. Then how? Jonah's expression softened. A man pulled you out. Ryan's heart stopped. A man. Jonah nodded. Tall, silver-haired. Some say he appeared out of nowhere. No one knows where he went after that. Rayan felt a shiver crawl up his spine. Elias. Or was it? His fingers brushed against the fabric of his hospital gown, and suddenly, he remembered. The hand on his shoulder. The figure in the light. A tear slipped down his cheek. Even in your darkest nights, he was there. A month had passed since the fire. The orphanage still stood, though scarred by the flames. The children had been temporarily moved to a shelter while repairs began. And Rayan stayed. For the first time in years, he had found something greater than himself. Purpose. He spent his days helping rebuild, carrying bricks, hammering nails, doing whatever was needed. And the children. They had started calling him the Lighthouse Man. It started as a joke. One of the kids, Aisha, had said, "You saved us, just like a lighthouse saves lost ships." The name stuck. And for the first time in a long time, Rayan didn't mind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a familiar voice called his name. He turned. His breath caught in his throat. Sarah. His ex-wife stood by the orphanage gate, uncertainty in her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she sighed. I heard what you did. Rayan swallowed. I didn't do it to impress anyone. I know, she said softly. That's why I'm here. She stepped closer, and for the first time in years, he saw something in her gaze he never thought he'd see again. Not pity. Not resentment. Oh, Rayan. She hesitated. I was angry when I left. I blamed you for everything. But the truth is, I never hated you. He closed his eyes, exhaling. I don't blame you for leaving. Tears welled up in her eyes. I wish I had stayed. I wish I had believed in you a little longer. Rayan shook his head. Oh, you did what you had to. And maybe we both needed to be lost to find our way back. She nodded, her lips trembling. And in that moment the past no longer mattered. A week later, Rayan was stacking wood when he heard footsteps behind him. Tariq. The homeless man stood there, his face filled with shame. I heard you almost died, Tariq muttered. Rayan gave a small smile. That seems to be a habit of mine. A strained silence stretched between them. Finally, Tariq reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle of cash. I stole from you, he admitted. And I thought I could live with that. But I was wrong. He held out the money. I want to give this back. And if you don't take it, at least let me work with you here. Let me do something right. Rayan studied him. This was the man who had betrayed him. And yet, wasn't he once a man who had fallen just as far? Rayan smiled. You don't need to pay me back, Tariq. Tariq frowned. But, just stay, Rayan said. Help me build something better. Tariq's lips parted in shock. And then for the first time he smiled back.